The Oilers maybe a little bit demoralized after that loss at home, but didn't look demoralized on Saturday. 8-1 win. Maybe the tide turning a little bit, and we could see this game the series get back to Canada for Game 6.
Well, I think about what happened last night with the Boston Celtics defeating the Dallas Mavericks to win the NBA championship. And in Game 4 of that series, Dallas won by 38 points, which was one of the most lopsided wins in NBA Finals history. And it didn't make a lick of difference last night. The Celtics were in control through most of the game. It was inevitable. The coronation was going to happen. And that's kind of how I feel about this. Just because, look, if the Oilers would have clawed out a 2-1 win in Game 4, I don't think anyone would be talking about the idea of the tie turning in the Stanley Cup final. It's just the fact that it was a dominant 8-1 win. The Oilers chased Sergei Bobrovsky from net, 5 goals on 16 shots. Connor McDavid woke up. Leon Draisaitl had a couple of points. So I understand why people think that this is the start of perhaps the Oilers making this more interesting than history would suggest it should. But I still, the odds are still heavily in the Panthers' favor. The Oilers tonight, if they win, it'll be just the 4th time in NHL history that a team down 3-0 in the Stanley Cup final forced a Game 6. It happened in 2012 when the Devils came, they were down 3-0 to the Kings, won games 4 and 5, and then got blown out in Game 6. But before that, it had been like 75 years since it previously happened. So it very rarely happens, which is my long-winded way of saying I don't think the game on Saturday is going to have any bearing on the game tonight. Could the Oilers win? Yes. But in terms of, are they going to carry over what happened in Game 4, and it's going to be the same in Game 5? I don't think so.
We had that conversation yesterday, and we're kind of talking about how, hey, maybe it was just a little letdown. It is a little bit different, though, because, you look at this Oilers team. I found a tweet earlier this week, and I haven't been able to find it since, but it showed kind of based on the way the games played out, who had the highest chance of winning in those first 4 games. And 3 of the 4, Edmonton, it was like 70% chance to win based on time on the attack and amount of shots. And Florida was still able to win 3 out of those 4. But Edmonton, you hope that maybe if they play their game and you have the best player in hockey and you have Leon Draisaitl, I think, honestly, it could end up being on Stuart Skinner and whether he has a solid enough game to match Sergei Bobrovsky to keep the Oilers in this series.
I like the way that Skinner has played in this series. I think he was good the other night. He didn't have to be great. He didn't face a ton of chances, but the chances that the Panthers did generate, the high-quality chances, he did stop them. The Panthers are 4-1 following a loss this postseason. They've only lost consecutive games once, and that, I believe, was games 2 and 3 of the Eastern Conference Final against the Rangers. And then they went on a 6-game winning streak because they won the final 3 games of that series and the first 3 games of the Stanley Cup Final. So the Panthers, they don't let losses pile up. They're a good team at shaking off losses. The exact numbers for Bobrovsky in games following a loss in the postseason: 4-1, a 1.97 goals against average, and a 9.14 save percentage. So good numbers for Bobrovsky. I'm not expecting him to let the last game carry over.
Does it feel like all of the pressure is on the Panthers tonight, though? Heading back home, Game 5, you led 3-0. If you let this get back to Canada, who knows what happens? The Oilers head back to Edmonton. You're at home in Game 6, a chance to force Game 7, and then in Game 7, it's winner take all. It does feel like if the Panthers don't get Edmonton tonight, they could be in some trouble.
Yeah, I think if the Oilers do win this game and you go back to Edmonton, still up 3-2, I think that's when the doubt starts to maybe creep in a little bit. The Panthers have been good at home. I think they're 8-3 at home in the postseason. As I just said, they don't let losses fester. They've been very good at bouncing back off of losses in those 5 games, by the way, where they're 4-1 after a loss. They've outscored opponents 21-10. And I think 5 of the goals against came in one game against the Rangers. So they've been very good at shutting down their opponents after losing. So that plus all of the history that's still on their side to win this series, I think the Panthers ultimately shake it off. It's just a blip on the radar. I heard Willie say he's picking the Oilers to win this game. I'm confident in the Panthers. It may not be a blowout like we saw with the Celtics last night. And if you remember correctly, I think it was 9-3 was the Stanley Cup clinching game last season, Vegas defeating Florida.
Yes.
That was a blowout, but by that point, the Panthers had virtually no healthy players. Matthew Tkachuk didn't play in that game, had a broken sternum. Lots of guys were playing with significant injuries. But I still like the Panthers in this game. I just think the body of work after losing games is impressive enough that I don't think they're going to let this one tumble down, roll down the track, so to speak.
I think you're right, and I feel like myself and a lot of people are trying to talk ourselves into the Oilers because we don't want the series to be over. It's been a little bit of a disappointing end to the postseason in both the NHL and NBA. It felt like we got great series in the first couple of rounds, but the semifinals, the conference finals in both leagues were a little anticlimactic, and now we possibly get 2 series ending in 5 in the championship series for the second straight year. We're going to get into this in the next segment, but it is a lot of people I think are trying to talk themselves into the Oilers making this comeback just because we want to see a Game 6, a Game 7 with the Oilers trying to make some history.
Yeah, and the multi-day layoff is hard. I mean, I feel like every game in the NBA Finals there are 2 days in between all of the games. In this series, there are 2 days in between games that involve travel. So if there is a Game 6, it won't be until Friday. If there is a Game 7, it won't be until next Monday. It's just that multi-day break, which I understand because I'm sure this has been said multiple times on the station. This Stanley Cup Final, it's the furthest distance traveled between 2 opponents.
Yes.
More than 2,500 miles between Sunrise, Florida, and Edmonton, Alberta. So they need that extra day. But, it also leads to, we end up talking too much. But then again, that's what sports talk radio is all about, is talking too much. So, I mean, I would like to see more hockey. Don't get me wrong. But I do believe that the Panthers shake off what happened because I think the fact that they got embarrassed in that game will motivate them more.
Yeah, adds a little fuel to the fire.
Right. Like if they had lost a tight game, I think that would be different. The fact that they lost so decisively, I do think will ultimately work in their favor. So I think the Panthers pull it out tonight and win the Stanley Cup at home. But if the Oilers win and we get another day of hockey, I'm not going to complain.
I think you make a good point, Adam, about the travel too. I'm sure that is a huge motivating factor for the Panthers, that they do not want to hop on another long flight up to Edmonton if they lose tonight's game. Again, pregame coverage starts at 6:30 right here on the game, so you can listen in to all the action as the Panthers try and close out the Stanley Cup at home, while Edmonton tries to send it back to Canada for Game 6. Mentioned we were going to talk about these championship series that it's just been disappointing. Last year, Denver and Vegas in the NBA and NHL both won in 5 games. Trending in that direction again. Just not seeing as many classic championship series anymore. We're going to dive into that next. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. If you want to chime in, you can text or call. Our phone line's driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. Again, coming up on our show, we're going to talk some Preds later in the hour. We'll do some Titans in the 4 o'clock hour, along with Trevor Maddich joining the program at 4:30, and some College World Series talk later in the show. Jake Lyman, Adam Vingan, in for Jared Stillman today. This is Stillman & Company on 102.5 and 106.3 The Game.
106-88. Boston leading Dallas. They're all on their feet here at the Garden. The coaches shake hands, Joe Mazzulla and Jason Kidd. The final 4 seconds tick away. Get ready to raise an 18th banner, Boston. The Celtics are once again the winningest franchise in the history of the NBA. It's an 18th title for the Celtics, the 2024 NBA champions.
The Boston Celtics winning their 18th title in 5 games, taking down the Dallas Mavericks 106-88 last night. Ended a chance of maybe a comeback there from Dallas. Stillman and Company brought to you by Jarrett Company's Fire and Commercial Plumbing HVAC Division. Call 615-515-1270 or visit jarrettcompaniesinc.com. Jake Lyman and Adam Vingan in for Jared Stillman today as he is on vacation all week long. Hearing that call, Celtics able to close it out in 5 games despite that blowout win from Dallas in Game 4. Tonight, similar situation. Panthers were blown out in Game 4 by Edmonton. Oilers trying to send it back to Canada. Adam, I wanted to get into this. Just, it feels like we don't get any good championship series, at least over the last few years. Last year, Denver was kind of the favorite heading into it with Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. They ended up winning in 5 games. Seems like the same thing happened with the Celtics. They were the favorite heading into the playoffs. They win in 5 games over Dallas. Hoping we don't get a second straight Stanley Cup final that ends in 5 games. I went through the numbers. Both of those Stanley Cup Finals, NBA Finals, have only had 2 Game 7s since 2010. Just not getting and the NBA can attribute both of theirs to LeBron James. The Ray Allen 3 against the Spurs, and then the 3-1 comeback against the Warriors. And then the Stanley Cup, I believe it was 2011 with Boston and Vancouver.
Yes.
And then 2019 Blues and Bruins again.
St. Louis
so
and Boston.
I understand not every series is going to go 7, but it feels like a while since we've had a classic series that we look back on and say, wow, that was amazing. 7 games, 2 really good teams competing the entire way.
Well, let's look at the Stanley Cup playoffs this year as a whole and think about the memorable series. And in the first round, you had 2, I would say. You had Dallas defeating Vegas in 7 games.
Yep.
Dallas lost the first 2 games of that series
At home,
tied it on the road. I think they went up 3-2, and then it was 3-3, and then they beat Vegas in 7 games. And you also had Boston and Toronto. Great rivalry. Yes. Toronto down 3-1 in the series, win games 5 and 6, and then Boston wins in 7. Was that an overtime game?
It was.
Yes. So that
2-1.
Yeah. So that was a good. And then you move to round. You move to round 2. Edmonton needed 7 games to beat Vancouver. The other 3 series went 6 games. The Western Conference Final, both series went 6 games. Florida and New York had multiple overtime games. And so I think that as a whole, the Stanley Cup playoffs this year, I thought would have been really entertaining. There have been a few, uneventful, series, but as a whole, I feel like it has been pretty good. Then you go to the NBA, and there were some real stinkers, and that often happens in the NBA in the first round. Very chalky in the NBA playoffs. You had the Thunder sweep the Pelicans in the first round. You had the Timberwolves sweep the Suns in the first round. You had the Nuggets beat the Lakers in 5 games. One series went 7 games, the Cavaliers and the Magic. But
neither of those teams were going to contend for a championship.
Right.
So
I thought the Pacers-Knicks series was entertaining. I know by the end the Knicks were, they were basically
a skeleton crew.
They were gassed.
Yeah, and multiple players were injured. And I was like, the Pacers, Celtics, that might be an entertaining series. And then there was a sweep. Same with the Mavericks and the Timberwolves. So the NBA playoffs this year have not. Well, they were over. They were not captivating. No. I'm glad that this. I like that the Celtics won. I like. I'm a big Jason Tatum fan. Glad to see him win the NBA title. But by and large, the NBA playoffs lacked that suspense that made you want to sit down and watch the games. Oftentimes when I would turn on the finals this year, the Celtics would be up by like 25 by the time I was able to sit down. And then I'd be like, why am I watching this? And then the Mavericks would make it interesting, so you turn it on at the end. But they didn't, it wasn't must-see television.
No.
I feel like the Stanley Cup playoffs have had more of that. Like, I thought the Rangers-Panthers series was really entertaining. As I mentioned, multiple overtime games. I think three or four. Not very many duds in those series. So I feel like the Stanley Cup playoffs were better than the NBA playoffs this year. But to your point, it has been a while since I feel like, we've had that, like you said, how many Game 7s have there been?
There's only been two in the Stanley Cup Finals. Has only had two Game 7s since 2010.
Okay.
From 2001 to 2010, there were 5.
Wow.
So half of those series went to 7 games.
Yeah, there's nothing like, I know I'm not speaking out of turn here, but there's nothing like a Game 7 if you're a sports fan, especially in a championship series.
Yes, winner take all.
Right. So, I remember watching the 2019 Stanley Cup Final Game 7 between Boston and St. Louis. A bunch of us were at Neighbors in Germantown. I think I was with Chase for that one. And our old friend Ryan Porth. I think a bunch of us went and watched that game. And that was fun to watch, and watch the fans of those teams that were there watching the game because they were so invested in it. But yeah, look, as a hockey fan, I'm going to watch regardless. But yeah, it would be nice to have some more suspense.
And I think you're right talking about the disparity between the NBA and the NHL playoffs. I was talking about this on our Saturday show, that it felt like NBA interest is declining just because all those series, there was just such a stark difference between the talent. Like the top 4 seeds in the West were so much better than 5 through 8. And for some reason, the NBA wants to add more teams to the playoffs with the play-in tournament and all that. When
I like the play-in tournament.
I don't mind it because it's a one game, the 9 and 10, it's winner take all, and then the last game is winner take all and gets in as well. But I'm not a huge fan of adding more teams in a league that already has sweeps in the first round.
I'll be interested to see what the ratings are for Game 5 of the NBA Finals. I don't know if they're out yet. They might be out. But Game 6, this is from Austin Karp. ABC drew 9.62 million viewers for the Mavericks throttling of the Celtics on Friday. That was Game 4.
Yep.
That looks to be the second lowest NBA Finals Game 4 on record.
I saw that tweet too.
Yeah, behind only the pandemic bubble when Game 4 of Lakers Heat drew 7.54 million. That also aired in October because, of course, of the delayed postseason because of the pandemic. So, I feel like NBA ratings have not been great, despite the fact that they're about to make a ton of money on their television deal.
Yeah.
And I just think I think it's just that lack of suspense. Like, I like basketball. I am a basketball fan. I am more of a college basketball fan than an NBA fan, but I do watch the NBA. But it's just a lot of these games weren't very close. Like, it just seemed like, I'd love to sit down and watch Mavericks Timberwolves tonight. And by the time I'm able to sit down after my son goes to bed, the Mavericks are up by 27. It's like, now I'm not going to watch this game because I'm not going to watch a blowout. I'm not going to sit down and watch a blowout. And that's what I feel like a lot of it was. It was just a lot of lopsided games. Even if the score didn't end up lopsided, there was a period in the game where the score was significant. And if you're a fan just tuning in and the score is one team is up by 22 points, you're not going to sit down and invest your time in that game. Yeah,
if you just flip on the game and it's 59-37 midway through the second quarter, what's the point in sitting down and enjoying it? Carson on our text line says the same thing. He's a Celtics fan. He says, extremely happy that my Celtics won, but low-key, every game had me wanting to turn it off by halftime. 3 of the 5 games were won by at least 22 points.
Right. Yeah.
And Jared has talked about this, that how is the NBA getting this massive television deal when it feels like the interest in the NBA is steadily in decline compared to the NHL, which, at least this is just, an example, but I feel like I see on social media more people are talking about hockey and more people are getting invested in the Stanley Cup playoffs rather than the NBA playoffs, where I feel like I barely see anybody caring about it all that much.
Well, it's also a product of where we live, right? There's no NBA team here. The one that's closest, is not involved in the NBA playoffs. I mean, I don't know what the numbers would be in Nashville I'm sure I could look it up when the Grizzlies are in the playoffs, but they weren't.
That
if
is
I'm
true.
not mistaken. And it's just this is a hockey market, so I think more people are inclined to watch hockey even when the Predators aren't playing. So I think that has probably something to do with it. But to the texter's point, I mean, these games were not close, and if you're invested and you're a fan of the Celtics, of course you're going to sit down and watch the game because it's your team and you're watching the point of watching the second half. I saw Pritchard's half-court shot, and then I was like, okay, well, I'll come back in an hour and a half and watch the coronation. So, but that's the problem. It just feels like this is anecdotal. It just feels like there were a lot of blowouts or just games that were lopsided for most of them. Maybe there was a push at the end that made the score look better than the game would represent, but it's just a lot of blowouts, I feel like.
How about the post-game interview with Jason Tatum trying to recreate Kevin Garnett's "anything is possible" and just completely falling on his face on it?
He tried.
He did his best.
Was he going for that when he said we did it, or was he trying to do something else but make it similar to Kevin Garnett?
I think he was trying to get his moment, like his viral moment because you'll still see people put on Twitter the clip of Kevin Garnett like "anything is possible." And I feel like Jason Tatum was hoping that he could have that moment, and it was not. It felt forced. It felt very scripted.
So this is from Sports Media Watch after Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final. The Thursday's Panthers-Oilers Cup Final Game 3 averaged a 1.8 rating and 3.4 million viewers on ABC, up 31% in ratings and 25% in viewership from Golden Knights Panthers on TNT, TBS, and True TV last year. All 3 games of the Stanley Cup Final have increased double digits from last year's all-cable series, and that's the point as well. This is on ABC, so it's not on network television.
That is true.
That plays a part in the ratings as well. And the other thing to keep in mind is that Nielsen ratings do not count Edmonton because it's not a.
That is true. It's outside of the U.S.
It would have been better for ratings if it were the Rangers in the Stanley Cup Final because you would have the New York market.
Yes.
So, but the fact that they're still sustaining good numbers, despite the fact that you've got one Canadian team and one Southern team, speaks well of what the NHL has been doing.
It is interesting, though, looking at the NBA ratings, that there was talk of the NBA during the conference finals begging for a Boston-Dallas series instead of Indiana-Minnesota because of the ratings, and the ratings were still not that great. So maybe it's not a market thing. Maybe it's just an interest thing, and I guess we'll have to see long-term how that actually turns out if we continue to see these blowouts in these series down the stretch. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. Talking NBA and Stanley Cup Finals. Boston winning in 5 over Dallas, Edmonton, and Florida tonight. And again, you can tune in right here on the game. 6:30 pregame coverage starts of Game 5 down in Sunrise. When we come back, we're going to get into some Preds talk. We are somehow only about 10 days away from the NHL draft. A lot of stuff is going to start to come down the pipe. What is Barry Trotz possibly cooking up for this Preds team as he enters the offseason? We'll talk that next. Jake Lyman, Adam Vingan in for Jared Stillman today. Stillman Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
And number one, Gino, the Nashville Predators. Andrew Brunette has shown over the time that he's been a head coach in the NHL that he knows how to coach skilled players. He did it with Jonathan Huberdeau when he was in Florida. And this year, you take a look at a guy like Gus Nyquist, who in his mid-30s just had his best offensive season. The Nashville Predators and Andrew Brunette know how to get the most out of skilled players and utilize them properly.
TSN last week talking about Patrick Laine and possible fits for him this offseason if Columbus does move on. Stillman and company, Jake Lyman, Adam Vingan filling in for Jared Stillman on vacation. Broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville Studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership where the buzz is always about great service. Diving into some Preds offseason talk, it is crazy to think that we have a Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals tonight and possibly more games after that, but the draft is just 10 days away, and then we dive in to the offseason frenzy. Adam, talking about Patrick Laine, if Barry Trotz wants to make a splash this offseason and, maybe show the fan base that he is committed to going after it this year, Patrick Laine seems like a good place to start, a guy who maybe could use a change of scenery after not living up to the expectations in Columbus as much as his performance showed in Winnipeg. What do you think about that possible addition for the Preds? Would he be a guy that you think would be that missing piece for this Predators team?
I don't think he would be the missing piece, but I do think if you're able to buy low on Patrick Laine, this is what Robbie and I talked about last week when we first heard that cut. That was Frankie Corrado of TSN talking about his landing spots for Patrick Laine, his preferred landing spots. Patrick Laine has 2 years left on his contract at an $8.7 million cap hit, which would make him the highest paid forward on the team. That's more money than Philip Forsberg makes on a yearly basis. If the Columbus Blue Jackets keep half of that, and it's about 4.35 or is 4.35, $4.35 million for 2 years of Patrick Laine, I think is a risk worth taking, depending, of course, on what the return is. But as I was talking about with Robbie last week, you're not getting the Patrick Laine who took the league by storm as a teenager in his first few years in Winnipeg. He scored 80 goals combined in his first 2 years in the NHL, which I think it wasn't the NHL record, but I feel like it was it was him and Alex Ovechkin in terms of most goals scored in their first 2 seasons. They were like neck and neck. Which is good company to keep when it comes to goal scoring, considering Alex Ovechkin, soon to be the NHL's all-time leading goal scorer, most likely. His time in Columbus has not been great. He's missed a lot of games. He didn't play last year after this. I think his last game was in mid to late December. He entered the NHL's player assistance program in January and set out the rest of the season. He only played 18 games last year, had 6 goals and 9 points. But even in the shortened seasons he did play, when he did play, he was productive. In the 21-22 season, he played 56 games, but he was a point-per-game player. 26 goals, 30 assists, 56 points in 56 games. In the 2022-23 season, he had 22 goals and 52 points in 55 games. So his availability is a red flag, but he does remain productive when he's in the lineup. Now, to Frankie Corrado's point, Andrew Brunette has shown an ability to squeeze the talent out of offensive players. He mentioned Nyquist in the clip. That's a good example. Nyquist had a career year in his mid-30s, playing on the top line with Ryan O'Reilly and Philip Forsberg. He mentioned Jonathan Huberdeau, who was 5th, I believe, in MVP voting during Brunette's one season in Florida before Huberdeau was traded as part of the Matthew Tkachuk deal, and his production fell off a cliff. I believe Huberdeau had 115 points, maybe 105. It was more than 100 points in that one season with Brunette. So Brunette clearly knows how to get a lot out of offensive players, just like Philip Forsberg had a career year under Brunette in his first season. So if I have confidence in Brunette to get Laine back on track. I'm not expecting, again, that Laine would be the player he was as a teenager when the Predators and Jets were going head-to-head, You think of that playoff series in 2018. Line was a part of that, with Blake Wheeler, Mark Scheifele, Dustin Byfuglien. You're not getting that Line. But I think that if you could get, a half-priced Line and you put him in a position to succeed, you put him in a top 6 role, you give him a lot of offensive zone starts, you put him on your power play. The guy hasn't forgotten how to shoot. There may be other things that aren't the same, but he's still, I think, a high-end scorer in the right situation. So I like the idea if you can get him at half price and you're not having to give up the farm. If you're able to give up a B-level prospect and a decent draft pick, then I would do it. If they're if Columbus is we want a first-round draft pick and your second-best prospect, no thank you. If it's 50% retained, one of those many second-round picks that the Predators have, and I'm just throwing a name out there, Igor Afanasyev. If that's something that could help push the ball in that direction, then I would be into it. But other than that, I would definitely not give up a lot for him. It would have to be at half price, and you'd have to basically not that they're going to give him away, but they don't really have a lot of leverage in this situation.
Yeah, we mentioned yesterday, Line, his first 3 seasons in the league, played at least 70 games, had at least 30 goals. In all 3 years, he hasn't done either of those things since. So a good chance to buy low. Looking at the Preds draft capital, have a first-round pick this year, 3 seconds, 2 thirds. Next year, 2 firsts, 2 seconds, 2 thirds. So no shortage of draft capital. And like you said, it would have to be the right prospect going back. I don't think you would be sending your highest-rated guy back to Columbus. But if you can send maybe a second this year or a second next year and a B-level prospect like Igor Afanasyev, I think that it would be a good buy low opportunity for this Predators team to get a guy that, like you said, Andrew Brunette, you give him the clay of that talented player, and maybe he can turn him back into 80% of what he was in Winnipeg.
Yeah, and that would be valuable because, as I said, although Line is not the player that he was as a teenager, he is still a very good player. Okay, here's what I was trying to say. His first 2 seasons, he had 80 goals. That was second in the league over that span behind Alex Ovechkin.
Gotcha.
So in his first 2 seasons, which were 2016-17 and 2017-18, he combined for 80 goals. Ovechkin had 82. So that's where Line was to start his NHL career. That's what I was trying to say earlier. But I'm thinking about Line, where would you play him? Would you play him on a second line with Tommy Novak as your center? Do you play him opposite, Luke Evangelista? You put him on your you put him on your power play and let him, tee off on one-timers, which he's good at. He's almost a specialist, I feel like, at this point. But the talent is still there. He still hasn't been cleared from the player assistance program, if I'm not mistaken. So he needs to go through that. And I used this example with Robbie last week. And one of the things they do have in common is they have both been in the player assistance program, but that's not what I'm getting at. Is Valeri Nichushkin. Valeri Nichushkin, had a promising start to his NHL career, not to the extent that Line did. He had 34 points in his first 79 games in his NHL career with the Dallas Stars. In his next 3 seasons, he had a total of 9 goals in 144 games. And the Stars bought him out. He signed a bargain basement deal with the Avalanche, and we've seen how important Nichushkin has become to the Avalanche over the past several years. He was their leading goal scorer at the time that he was suspended in the postseason for violating the terms of the player assistance program. But remember how huge Nichushkin was in the postseason when the Avalanche won the Stanley Cup. 9 goals, 15 points in 20 games for the Avalanche when they won the Stanley Cup. He had 9 goals in 8 games for the Avalanche this postseason before being suspended. So sometimes it's just a change of scenery can really help a guy out. And if the Blue Jackets are willing to let go of him at a steep discount, I would, if I'm Barry Trotz, I'm at least making the call. That's all I'm saying.
And it never hurts to buy low on a player that talented. If he's available and Columbus making a change in the front office, making a change behind the bench, so maybe an opportunity where he wants a change of scenery, I think it could be a good opportunity for the Predators. And only 26 years old, so it's not like he's super old and you're getting him on the steep downslope of his career. You could still get him back to, again, maybe 80-85% of what he used to be, which would be a really, really good player for this Preds team.
Right, because unrestricted free agents, just by the definition of how you have to become an unrestricted free agent, are often in their late 20s.
Yes.
28, 29, sometimes 27. Line A being a fresh 26. He turned 26 in April. Players in that range don't come available very often. We've talked a lot about Martin Necas. He's another player. He's a restricted free agent. He's 25. We've talked a lot about Mitch Marner, not so much recently. He's 27. Players in that age range don't become available very often. So it's different. Like if Line was 30, and I would not be having this conversation. It's because he's 26. He's still young. He's still theoretically in the prime of his career. So I saw some ridiculous mock trade that was on an adjacent YouTube video to the TSN clip that we played. And it was, let's see if I can remember this correctly. It was Patrick Laine and Jake Bean, who's a depth defenseman for the Blue Jackets. Patrick Laine and Jake Bean for Philip Tomasino, Zachary Leroux, Jeremy Lauzon, and a first-round pick. Absolutely not. I don't know what that person was experimenting with before they recorded that video, but under no circumstances would I make that deal, even in like an NHL video game, let alone in real life. But oftentimes what happens is people value their own play. If it happens all the time if you're a fan of a team.
Yeah.
You value the players on your team more than perhaps their actual value is. So, Line A, I remember the first time I walked by Line A, downstairs at Bridgestone Arena when the Winnipeg Jets were coming into town once, and I was blown away by how big he is.
Yeah.
He is deceptively big, and that's another thing that helps. He's 6'5", 205 pounds. That's what he's listed as. So, big kid, really talented. Took the time away from hockey. Hopefully, he'll get his life in order, whatever is ailing him. But again, buying low, I would consider it.
For that trade by ex-YouTuber.
Yeah. No, absolutely not. But a Line A for 2 years at under $5 million, I would definitely consider it.
I think you're right on. The fans just overvalue their players. I saw a Mitch Marner trade back when that was the whole thing. I think I mentioned this. It was like Mitch Marner for UC Saros, Luke Evangelista, and 2 first-round picks.
Yes,
and I was
I think I'm familiar with that one. Yeah, it's just... It's crazy. Look, I'm guilty of it too, but I like the idea of Line A if you're looking to add proven scoring, and hopefully not at a high cost. Like if he wouldn't, like he's not the kind of player that you go, oh my God, the Predators acquired Patrick Laine. This is going to change their trajectory significantly. No, but if it's part of a busier off season,
yeah.
I don't hate it. Like if that's the one thing that they do, if they were to do that, I wouldn't love it. But if it was like we got Line A, if Barry Trotz is like we got Line A, and then we also got this guy, like that, I think that would be different. Like I'm intrigued by the possibility.
615-737-1025 is our phone number. Could see some moves coming up in the next week and a half as we go up to the NHL draft in Las Vegas. We'll keep the Preds talk coming next. Jake Lyman, Adam Vingan, in for Jared Stillman. This is Stillman & Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Stillman Company on this Tuesday afternoon. Jake Lyman, Adam Vingan in for Jared Stillman. Jared's gone all week. Adam and I talking some Preds here as we gear up for the NHL draft just 10 days away in Las Vegas. Adam, I don't know if you saw Alex Doherty tweeted earlier today, the highs are going to be like 112 degrees in Las Vegas next weekend or something like that. So I think everybody will be comfortably inside the sphere for that draft, not walking the strip.
Well, I remember last year when the draft was here, it was very hot. I remember like the Nashville National Weather Service Twitter saying something to the effect of like, this is like the hottest week of the year. You know, and everyone that was coming from out of town from cooler climates was complaining about it. But like, look, I mean, like my dad is actually getting ready tomorrow. He's leaving for Las Vegas. He's going to 3 nights of the Dead and Company at the Sphere.
Nice.
So he'll be there. Yeah. I mean, I just remember. I'm trying to find this tweet from last year. It was very, very hot. Here it is. I actually found it. This was from last June 25th. Today's high temperature at Nashville was 95, and Clarksville got up to 96. That's the hottest that each city has been thus far in 2023. So it was perfect timing.
Something about the NHL draft,
right? Well, if they don't want that to happen, don't hold it in the South.
At least they don't need the ice.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember
that is true.
Like they've had it in Florida recently. Not too long ago, they had it in Buffalo. Like that, like Buffalo in the summer apparently is very nice. You don't want to be there in the winter, but in the summer apparently it's very nice, very temperate. But yes, this is the last centralized